Hello, this is James Hudnall, and welcome to another episode of Creative Secrets. This one is about the second act series of consequences, which we call progressive complications. This is the middle of your story. This is the largest part of your story. And this is where a lot of big stuff happens, where you get to really develop your characters, where you really get to show some of the themes and ideas in a big scale. But it's also a place leading up to the climax. But before you get to the climax, you have a turning point, as we discussed last episode. The turning point of the second act is called the crisis. And the crisis is where we will discuss things next episode, but for this episode we'll talk about progressive complications and what it means. Before we get into progressive complications, we should talk about what it is in the terms of a story. In real life, the average human being works to avoid complications at every instance and uses the path of least resistance, the easiest path to get what they want. As we discussed earlier, every story is about somebody wanting something and trying to get it. So in a story, you can do whatever you want, but you really should make it hard for the character to get what they want. It has what makes the story different and interesting. If you just do the obvious, then you're going to bore people. So you have to go in a different direction. You have to surprise people with things that they did not expect or see, but at the same time, it should make sense. A big problem with a lot of plots is that they have things that don't make sense in them, like plot holes where the logic falls apart. Those are things you want to avoid. So progressive complications is a series of events that take place in your second act leading up to the crisis. And they are basically your character trying to get what they want and failing over and over again and trying different things to get there. Just like in real life, if you were trying to get something and then you fail getting what you want, but then you try to think of another way to get it. Try to imagine situations like that. It's more complicated than, say, somebody going to the store and getting a carton of milk. It's more complicated and more important. You've created a situation in your story where you've tried to make it a critical event in that person's life, and their decision to go on this journey is not a simple one. It's an odyssey of a kind, and you are creating a series of events for them to experience, and you want to make them interesting and unpredictable as best you can. So we got that out of the way. Let's go into in more detail. Okay, let's go back to the Story Circle by Dan Harmon. So the first half of the Story Circle is the ending and the beginning. So the beginning is number 1. And that ends with the turning point at number 3. And in the middle you see number 2, which is the trigger event, which creates a need for the character to do something about the problem that's been created. So number 3, Go, puts the character on a path that is eventually going to lead to a conflict with the villain, the enemy, the antagonist, whatever you call them. That is what happens with Go. So they've entered the threshold. Now, the lower half of the circle is the second act. And this is composed of 5 parts. So we already talked about Go. Search, number 4, is where your character is actively searching for the thing that they need to resolve the problem as they see it. So they're looking for the object of desire, which you discussed in another video. And then find is where they find it, but it's not what they expect. You can watch a lot of movies and you'll see this all played out exactly like I say. Most story structures, especially in films, follow this pattern, especially films of the last 20, 30 years. Again, it's a structure that's worked for thousands of years. It's just been simplified in this chart. So the terminology has been modified to modern times, but the Story Circle, is based on Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, which is a little more elaborate because it's mythology based, but it's the same principles. So as we see, there are these points in your story. So the middle part of the second act is where they find what they're looking for. Now the exact page in your story, it doesn't matter. It only matters that you can structurally see it in a pattern. It doesn't have to follow specific, page numbers like you see in some screenwriting books. That's just that's a story structure theory that started with Sid Field in the 80s, and it's just really kind of a formula that isn't necessary, especially if you're not doing screenplays. But it's good to kind of get a sense of your position in the story so that you can cut out wasted material and have everything fall into place properly. I say properly because this pattern works mainly because it's the way people see life. If you want something, you go look for it, and then hopefully you find it, and then you come home. But in the course of a story, you got to have events that make it more dramatic. And this is a great structure for that, so that's why I'm teaching it. It's basically a very simple pattern to follow, at least for beginners, and I would say that it's good as a general rule of thumb. Number 6 is take. Now what this means is this is where your character may take the thing that they've been looking for, but it also creates a problem because this is where they're on a collision course with destiny, where the villain is waiting to stop them, where the villain is searching for them. In reverse, it's a reverse of the hero's journey. The villain has his own journey in reverse. So he comes into collision at this point also. Number 7 is shown as return, but it's also the crisis. This is the crisis of your story. This is where the hero and the villain duke it out for the supremacy of the story. Whoever wins decides what the moral of the story is. The villain is representing the position that's the opposite of what the hero is representing. So the hero is sort of like the counter argument to the argument of your story. So this is a point which I will get into much more detail in the next chapter, but I just wanted to cover what the progressive complications are, which basically means these are complications that progress throughout this section. Each choice that the hero makes pushes them closer to the final conflict. Each choice puts them on a path, and it's a point of no return. So each choice is pushing them further and further along towards more danger, whether they realize it or not. And this is where you have to make it more exciting. This is where your character is revealed through their actions, through the choices they make. It gives the audience a chance to understand who they are and what they are about. This is a great opportunity for you to really do good characterization. So those are the principles that you should think about when you're doing this part of the story. The stakes have to constantly be raised to make it more exciting, and the choices that your character makes gives us more empathy for them if you do it right. Because the decisions they make have to make sense, but at the same time they should be surprising in some way to make it more original, and people will appreciate it when a character does something smart or thoughtful or clever. Those are things that get people interested. These are things that make characters legendary, so that's why you have to constantly think about the outcome and see what you can do in each instance. Don't go for the first thing that comes through your head. Always think of every possible alternative thing that could happen and what is the best one that would be clever and interesting and original. Those are things you got to think about. Just remember, don't make the character do the same thing over again. Once somebody tries something, you need them to move on to something else, because repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, is a definition of insanity, and it's boring. So the other thing to consider is conflicts. Also, during this section of the story, try to work in 3 different types of conflict, which is the internal, the personal, and the societal, because that will make it a more epic story, and it will also stretch your character and make the character seem more 3-dimensional. Okay, that's it for this episode. The next one is going to be about the crisis, which is the beginning of the 3rd act, and it's interesting all unto itself. So please check the links below. Please subscribe if you haven't done so. Please let people know about this site. Please like if you can this video. I am trying to make this channel into something, so anything you can do to help me would be really appreciated. And thank you very much. I'll speak to you next time.